I've been an electronics sort of a nerd and a crazy person when it comes to electronics. I was probably the only person in all of Delhi University working on that. Humanoids. I was teaching my teachers MATLAB, and I was like, let's explore why people are not getting into robotics. I have to find people who actually want to do something more in robotics. I launched my online store, but it was always about like I want to solve the problem of the ecosystem. How do I make sure other people get into robotics? Was the main thing for me. I wanted people to have stuff that nobody else was having access to. I think we just launched in September. People from MIT dropped by some sort of a research. There was the only makerspace in Delhi at the time. I was like very selfishly, I was getting access to all of these people who wanted to work in hardware. I know each and everybody's potential. I had this lady come up to me one time and say, "I'm losing my eyesight. Can it help me navigate the environment and be a guide dog?" So those kinds of things people want and expect more out of a machine.
Hello everyone, my name is Anuj and today we have an extraordinary guest with us who embodies the true spirit of innovation in the industry. With over 20 years of experience as a robotist, humanoid technology expert, visionary researcher, and a six-time entrepreneur, he is the founder of JMoon and Roborium. He has established himself as a leader in the field of physical AI, teaching over 6,000 people while consulting more than 200 founders across 13 countries. With two master degrees, over 100 mock certifications, and a deep passion for robotics, he has made remarkable strides in the tech world. He is here to share his journey with us about how it all started and how founders can break into this field. Welcome to the show, Jasmeet.
Thank you so much. That was a great introduction, and now I feel like you've run through my whole resume and everything has been covered. And now I have nothing to talk about. That's the highlights. We'll get into and we'll talk. And I can, but we can talk about robotics all day. I can have that conversation anytime. Can have that conversation even if I'm like half asleep. So let's do this.
All right. So, Jasmeet, your journey in robotics and AI is nothing short of inspiring. From founding India's first text makerspace to creating your own robotic parts, what initially sparked your interest in this field?
Ooh. So I've been an electronics sort of a nerd and a crazy person when it comes to electronics since I was very young. Since I was like less than 10 years old, maybe like 5, 6 years old, right? So that was when I got my first laptop. Uh, I didn't have the laptop, but my dad did, but I had access to that laptop. I had a bunch of old computers at home. I had robot toys as a kid from that my dad used to get from Germany. And so there were all of these things that sort of led to that. And by the time I was, I think, 14 or 15, my older brother was in engineering. And in his first year of engineering, he was doing electronics projects. And I was sort of doing it with him. I was helping him out. So that sort of started the electronics automation sort of journey where I was getting better at electronics. And even if you look at all my grades in high school, and every single grade is like in like anything related to electronics, physics, like 10th, 11th, 12th is like 90s, 80s, 90s scores, and everything else is like 50s because I didn't really care about anything else. So I was always focused on the science and the engineering part of it. So everything has been that way. The journey as a founder, I think, started in third year of engineering where I was doing computer science engineering. And in third year of engineering, I was like, oh, I can combine my skills in computer science with my passion for electronics and I can put them together. And I already have a brain that sort of thinks mechanically. Like, oh, this is perfect for me. Like, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I want to build robots. I want to help other people build their robots. And I want to be surrounded by robots my whole life. So that sort of started that idea. Like, I want to start a company that is focused around robotics and sort of started the journey there.
I'm sure the journey must have not been easy. Like being a third year engineering student to starting your own company at
Yeah.
that point of time with I think engineers don't have that much money. Like back when I was an engineer, we only had money for a pizza once a week. So during that time to start your own company, what were the key challenges that you were facing?
So before I could start a company, I was like, but what company will I build? So I had some designs in robots that I was like, I want to build these designs. I still have those designs. I created these designs in 2008, right? I still have those
Right.
designs on a piece of paper. I keep it in a notebook, and some of those designs are still not possible. Like the technology doesn't exist yet for those designs to exist. So like I clearly can't do that. So this is very futuristic. This is very some. This will take a lot of time and effort. So let's start solving and doing things within the ecosystem. So during my engineering, I was just getting started. I was starting to put together all of my skills, and then I went into masters, and I got to do things that most people don't get to do, which is in my masters I was doing research in self-driving algorithms. At that point of time, nobody was doing it, right? Especially in my college, nobody was doing it. I
Okay.
was probably the only person in all of Delhi University working on that. I was working on humanoids. I was working on self-driving algorithms. I was working on computer vision applications. I was teaching my teachers MATLAB at that point of time. So I remember being this like totally focused. By the time I was in my masters, I was very focused on what I was doing. I was like,
Wow.
as soon as I graduate, I know I'm going to start a company at some point. As soon as I get a problem to figure out, I will start that company. And what the problem was, I didn't know yet because I was too stressed out about studies and making sure that I graduate and all those kinds of things. I didn't have time to explore the problem. And there was one thing that existed already, which was at that point of phase. I remember this phase is 2000 and let's say 10 to 2013 14. There was a lot of education happening in robotics. People were being taught at Mega 16, at Mega 32, how to program them, how to do embedded C sort of coding, how to do a little bit of ARM level coding, but nobody was teaching Arduino. So Arduino was just launched. I think I was one of the first few people in India to actually have access to an actual, not a clone version of Arduino, but like an actual real board Arduino. So I think that was sort of the, and that this happened in 2011 for me. So 2011 I started using Arduino, and then it sort of took off from there because it was easier. So by the time I graduated, that's when I was like, let's explore why people are not getting into robotics. Why are more people not choosing this as a career? That was my main thing. Like if I want to start a company, I'm going to have to hire people who actually want to choose robotics as a career, right? They want to be in a company and work for robotics, and not, I can't hire people who want to do engineering of anything and then go into IT and get a job. Those people are not going to come to me.
Right.
So I'll have to find
Right.
people who actually can do things and can do them really well. And they have a level of expertise that sort of matches mine. And they're willing to learn. And I can teach them the rest, but they need to have some sort of like, hey, I want to do something more in robotics. So that was the motivation. Like I was like, why does this ecosystem not exist yet in India? We've been teaching for 4 3 4 years, 5 years. So why are people just doing robotics during their engineering training days and summer internships and that kind of stuff? But when they graduate, they just move to IT, or they go into something that's completely non-core in their sector. Mechanical people are going into IT, electronics people are going into IT. So why was this happening? So that sort of created the problem. We're like, let's look at the ecosystem. What is the problem? What is the core of that problem? And let's start solving there. So that late, yeah, 2012, 2000, early 2013, I started looking into that. And roller May, I had my company registered. And by the end of that year, I had found the problem I had been solving. I'd done all the market research and all sorts of things. And I launched my online store, which is Roborium, on January 2014, and it was fully sort of like launched in January with like 30 products. I was a distributor for a bunch of companies from around the world, and that sort of launched all of the other initiatives that came after. But it was always about like, I want to solve the problem of the ecosystem. How do I make sure other people get into robotics? Was the main thing for me.
All right.
Yeah.
So, what was your first breakthrough?
So Roborium had multiple sort of breakthroughs actually. So one of the first things Roborium, I'll tell you about the problem first. The problem is at that point of time was we did not have access to quality hardware from around the globe. In local markets, and 40 other online stores existed at the time, or who were selling robotic parts all around India, right? But the way that they were approaching it was they buy products from the local market and they sell it online with a slight markup. So everybody had the same product that was already in Indian market. My problem was, if you want to build humanoids, you need something that's way better quality than what you can find in a local market. Like you can't use DC motors. You need really high quality motors, and you need something that's very specific for building humanoids. So like that thing didn't exist easily. I had access to it in my engineering days. I was exposed to it during my internships and my other sort of experiences that I had, but it was very limited. I had to spend a lot of money to get into that, right? And to learn those skills. So that was the thing. Like that was the barrier number one, that you have to have these products in India. They need to be accessible. You need to have to make sure that it's coming from a quality supplier, right? And that you are perceived as a brand that's considered a quality supplier who can provide long-term support. And nobody does that in India. Like once you buy from the local market, as soon as you've left their shop, there's no refunds. If you go home and something goes bad with your motors, there's no refunds, right? So most of these shops, I started looking at it and I noticed that most of these shops are like wholesalers. So in the supply chain, there's manufacturers who are sitting maybe in China who are selling the cheap parts. Somebody brings them in. That probably is like the warehouse or the distributor who sort of brings these things in, or goes to China and actually buys them and brings them back. And then they sell it to the wholesalers, whether it's in Mumbai, whether it's in Bangalore, whether it's in Delhi. They all three places have like a wholesale electronics market where you can buy stuff, right? And all of them have the same products. So clearly, that was not the right way to go. Like, you can't do the same thing that everybody else is doing. And then you have online retailers who are buying from them. So, what I did was I got in touch with the manufacturers directly. And this is manufacturers in China, manufacturers in South Korea, manufacturers in US, Canada, UK over the years, all over the place, right? Who were selling better products and better quality stuff that was not available anywhere else in India. That was the main thing. I was like, I wanted people to have stuff that nobody else was having access to. So when I did that, I launched, I think, Roborium with a distributorship of 30 plus products, right? 30 something products at that time. Very minimal sort of inventory. And I was like, let's see what happens now. This was an experiment, right? Let's see if we can actually sell this. The market research was done. I knew what's happening in the market, but are people actually ready to buy? That was not clear. Who's going to buy this? Who is going to pay for it? All of those decisions were up in the air. I had no idea. So when I launched that, I think for 3 months, no sale at all. And you launch a store, online store, nothing happens, right? Nobody knew about it. I was very bad at marketing at that point of time. I had no clue what to do. Didn't really promote it in any way. So for I think 3 months, no sale. I kept editing things in the back and making sure that things were improving in some way. One problem I found was that people, when you give them access to this quality sort of hardware, they don't know how to use it, right? So they want some sort of a manual that's not written in Chinese, that actually tells them how to use it, has a sample sort of a code that they can just use. So that was the thing that was missing. So I started writing code, testing out each of the pieces, writing sample codes, libraries, everything for everything that I was selling. And that sort of became the brand of Roborium, that it had products that nobody else had user manuals and detailed use how to use instructions, and it had prices that were, I would say, much cheaper than anybody who was trying to compete, right? So those, and making it sort of affordable, but also making sure that my profit margins were okay enough for me to actually grow, right? So those were sort of the combination of how Roborium came together. And so that was the first one. And the second breakthrough was, I think, in 2017. So I've been running Roborium for 3 years. In 2017, uh, I had just come back from the Bay Area for the first time. I'd gone to Silicon Valley for the first time in my whole life. I'd been to US before. I've actually lived in the US in my when I was like 10 years old. And then I went to the US and a lot had changed. And I came back from the valley. I was like, why are we not doing this kind of stuff here in India? There's so much more I could do. So I came back really motivated to do a lot more things, and a lot of drastically innovative things started happening in 2017. But for Roborium, the first thing that happened was I remember we had grown in 3 years from 30 products to 300. In 2017, within 6 months, I had gone from 300 products to 1800 products. So I was like,
Wow.
I need to bring even more stuff into India. Like I can't have like growth. Because I was running multiple initiatives, Roborium had sort of taken a backseat. So it was growing organically, but at that point of time, I was like, I need to bring way more stuff and have people access way more stuff. So I think that was the other thing that I was like, okay, this is good. I can now expand on this really, really massively and sort of create a moat that nobody has. So that was the second time that Roborium sort of saw a spike in the sort of initiatives that we were taking. So yeah, that those were the main two for Roborium.
So, how did JMoon happen with all of the things going on with Roborium?
Yeah.
Like, how did you get the idea or how did you set up the infrastructure for JMoon?
So JMoon Technologies was the umbrella company. So JMoon was, and under JMoon Technologies, everything else existed. So JMoon stands for Jasmeet's Moonshots. So it's a short for that, right? So anything I do is called JMoon because it's a vision that I have, like a long-term vision that I have. So Roborium was getting started, right? I have all of this product now, close to 100 different sort of products. I have equipment like 3D printers we were making at the time. We were making our own. We had CNCs. We had a bunch of other tools that nobody had access to. And I thought, and I had this brain, I was like, well, the next part of the problem was that people, A, either could not afford, some of those students could not afford the products that I was selling, the high end stuff. The high end stuff was being sold to research institutes. The high end stuff was going to corporate R&D stuff, right? But students couldn't really afford it. So I was like, what can I do to create a space? Like I have all the tools I need, right? I have access to everything that a student could want. And I have some interns sort of working with me. Why not open up the space for everybody? After everybody leaves at 5, the employees, the interns, everybody leaves at 5 p.m. After 5 p.m., the space is open on a weekday. I can stay in the office for till 9 p.m. I don't care, right? I'm always working. I'm already there. So I can open up that space. On a weekend, the space is not being used at all. Everybody's home. There's nobody else besides me in the office. So why not do that as well? So the problem was that people didn't have access to these resources. Now, if you want to start experimenting with robotics, you might have to buy your own 3D printer. You might have to buy your own soldering equipment. You might have to buy your own sort of PNCs or whatnot, chemicals to do your PCB etching and all sorts of things, right? So that takes a lot of effort and money and resources that students don't have. So I thought, why not? I have all of this. Why not just open it up and I'll charge people a little bit of membership or let them use it for have the space for workshops or whatnot. So that sort of launched the Makerspace. Like, let's create, and Makerspace model existed in the US. It had not really existed in India. There was maybe in tech there was no other Makerspace. I started the one in Delhi, and then I think 4 months after I did, the second one came up, and also in Delhi. 4 5 months after that, Bangalore, Pune, Mumbai, a lot of other places sort of cropping up. So that's when the makerspace ecosystem sort of took off. The maker culture took off, and now it's become Make in India and incubators and um, what's that called? The bunch of other initiatives that the government now supports, innovation hubs, innovation, Atal Tinkering Labs, all of those came way later, right? In 2014, none of this existed. All sort of passionate DIYers getting together and saying, let's build this culture. So that sort of started building and taking a shape of it on its own. But I was very fortunate that people actually saw what I was trying to do and saw the vision. I had really great people come in early on and sort of give me the insights. I remember somebody from Israel at some point came to the makerspace like early on in the days. We just, I think we just launched in September, and he came in October, and he said, "This is how we do it." People from MIT dropped by, people from US were who were traveling in India doing some sort of a research. They wanted a space like that. And they were like, "Oh, I remember one guy came in and said, I am building doing an experiment with beehives. I need woodworking tools. Do you have woodworking tools?" And I was the only makerspace in Delhi at the time. And so we didn't have woodworking tools at all. I had electronics tools. We're like, "How far away are you?" He said, "It's going to take me an hour to get there." Like, great. Give me an hour. By the time you get here, I'll have all the wood and the tools that you need. So I had a handsaw for him. So we didn't have a power saw at that point. I could only get access to a handsaw. I got 2 by 2 wooden frames and all sorts of things just so that he could work out of the makerspace. And that started building it. It was never a wasted effort. It was like, if I'm going to have the woodworking thing, might as well have the tools here. So drill bits and all those sort of things started building one by one, according to what the people wanted, right? So the makerspace came about in that way. It's a very slow graduational thing where what anybody wanted to experiment on, they had access, right? And then the third thing was, I was like very selfishly was getting access to all of these people who wanted to work in hardware, right? And these people, I saw the passionate people, and I saw the people who were really wanting to take this and make a career out of it. So I was like, well, I now have this pool of people I can hire anytime, right? The community has now grown to a point. I know each and everybody's potential. I know exactly how they function. I know exactly how they like to think and how they, the kind of skills they have. So I can just hire from all of these pool of people anytime I want, right? So that was on my behalf. That was like, I have this great pool. I can just tap into this at any point of time. So I think the community on Facebook was very active, and on Facebook we had people from all over India, obviously, be part of that. So that was very active. I created the first ROS community of India. So ROS community didn't really exist. When I became the distributor for that robot that you see right there, TotalBot 3, that's when ROS was sort of taking off in India around the same time. And so I started Ross's India as something that would be complementary to that product. A, it would help me sell that product. B, I now have access to people who use Ross. C, I can encourage other people to use Ross and have access to that robot and use it in the makerspace. So it was all very interconnected for me. I was like the vision that I had was very interconnected for me. So the makerspace, the R&D that we did, Roborium, it was all very interconnected to each other and flowing into each other. I was resources from one were going into the other, sort of a thing. Yeah, exactly. So I had access to the thing. I had the resources, they had the drive to build something cool or whatever. I just had to make sure that what they were building was actually useful. Sometimes I let people do, especially the interns, I would give them free rein and I would tell them, you have a summer to to do your internship, right? You have access to all of these tools. Go crazy, do whatever you want, right? Build whatever comes to mind. I don't care if it doesn't have market value. I don't care if it's going to go anywhere, but build whatever you comes to mind. So some people built a very dexterous sort of a hand, right? Of that could have been, if we had gone further into it, we have done it more. We could have probably got into prosthetics at that point of time. So it was very articulate hand. Another guy I remember built a small version of a robot dog, which was probably this big. like tabletop sort of a robot dog that you could build. There were people who were working on humanoids who had sort of experience in humanoids. These were students I was already sort of sponsoring in SRM University in Chennai. They have a team humanoid that I was sort of sponsoring and I was investing in, and I saw the potential of that team. And so they used to come to do a summer vacation sometime, a summer internship with me sometimes. And so it all sort of came together, like it was a matching of resources and technology and making sure that other people could work on these things. So I taught a lot of them the things that I had done. So a lot of them still did not like really have access to humanoids. They were not familiar with humanoids, or self-driving stuff that I had done nobody was really familiar with. How can you do self-driving with cheaper hardware, cheaper sensors, by making sure you have better AI and better by adding more data and less sensors, you can how to do that kind of sort of navigation. So all sorts of things are happening in the R&D side also, but makerspace wise, that was like how it came together. Yeah, when you were doing the internship, you guys were there was a lot of projects happening, and I later hired Jatin and Harpreet and a bunch of other people after they graduated. But they were working on once I hired them, they were working on the R&D part. Then it was not anything that you can build. Then it was what I have a vision for. During the internship, you can do whatever you like, right? Build you. I had interns who were working on writing like libraries because I could use whatever they were doing. Any of the code that they wrote could go into the public domain and become a tutorial for something that Roborium had because they're using the products from Roborium. So I can just use all that code to be a sample code for a project that you can build with Roborium products, and now it can help me increase Roborium sales. Ultimately, they're getting the skills, I'm getting sales out of it, so they can do whatever they want, right? But when you go into R&D, and when I hired a lot of people, a lot of them were remote actually at that point because a lot of people were working on AI piece of it. I think the mechanical and the electronics people were more hands-on and in the office. But at that point of time, I think this is 2017, 2018, when a lot of people were remote. A lot of people were in other cities, not just like they were not even in Delhi. So I was handling teams that were very diverse. I think at one point we were also doing 4 day work week. So we were doing 10 hours a day, experimenting with that sort of a working model. And that seemed to work a lot, especially for the mechanical people for some reason. They really liked the 4 day work week model. And so they didn't have to come into the office for more than 4 days, right? So I think that sort of experimentation with the teams and stuff was also very paramount in the kind of innovation that we did. Yeah, but they in the R&D it was things that either I had a vision for or I had paying clients for because we were doing R&D internally, and we were doing R&D for other companies as well, or helping them out in R&D in some way. For example, Nvidia Jetson, when they were coming out with the Jetson boards, there were resources that went from Roborium that they bought, like SBCs in the market, that they could benchmark their board against. So that kind of stuff was happening. Amazon's R&D team was working on some stuff in India, and they used to buy either products from Roborium, or we would help them out with technology piece of it. There was a Tata airline, the Vistara Airlines. They wanted to build a robot for their airport lounges, and they wanted to create sort of a prototype. So we had people go in and sort of help out with that piece of it as well. My technical expertise on building robots and actually autonomy, majorly like self-driving piece of it, how to make sure that the robots are autonomous, was the one piece that I helped them out with. So a lot of things that were going on around that time in the R&D piece, but that was like all the employees had to work on that piece alone. Like nothing outside of the R&D was could be done by employees. We were all focused on things that could become products or we already had paying clients for and we were sort of deploying in the market. No, so the R&D projects that we were doing for other clients, you can't really open source because that was under NDAs and stuff, and they owned the code whatever we wrote, right? So majority of that, I would say, none of that actually was open source. All the open source stuff was is probably still available on like the blogs of JMoon Makerspace, or somewhere on the on the internet. Is I'm sure it's available still. But a lot of the projects that sort of we were doing and the interns were doing, only that stuff ended up being open source. Everything else was closed. Anything that I did as an experiment, sometimes I would have some time, free time, to do some coding myself and sit down and work on some idea myself. Anything I did that I could open source that was not directly related to the R&D, that I open sourced. But majority of the other part of code was never open sourced at all. I still own, either I own it or the companies that we work for own it. So I have a lot of the internal code that we built. Any student can start just collecting the hardware and start putting it together. So that was the problem, right? Like, I wanted people to get into this industry. I wanted to make sure they had as few barriers of entry as possible. Like, any problems that they had, for electronics people, the major problem is, let's say, how do we do high level coding? How do I do C++, Python? I have to learn from scratch. It's not being taught in the engineering classes. How do I get into that? So why not remove that barrier, right? For the computer science people who want to get into it, they might have expert knowledge skills on like the coding piece of it and the AI piece of it, but hardware has to be cheap enough for them to experiment. For mechanical people, both of those problems exist, and they need access to, because mechanical people love having access to resources, and they have big machines that they need access to just do manufacturing. So they want something where they can have access to multiple 3D printers, or a place where they can just go crazy sort of and enjoy themselves and build whatever they want to build, right? And work on experiments. My problem solving was around that. I want to solve problems for the ecosystem, which means I have to go back to the starting point and solve problems that exist for people to even get into the ecosystem. So that's sort of how everything came together, and all of these initiatives um, came one after the other. At one point, I think this is 2015. By 2015, we had another makerspace that was operating in Mumbai. They had come to Delhi, and I think, yeah, 2015, 2016, they had come to Delhi. So when they came to Delhi, I set up their electronics division. Like, they didn't have any clue on what to do with electronics, and I have a makerspace. I have my own members, but I was in West Delhi, they were in South Delhi, and they wanted to set up an electronic space. I literally went there and said, helped them set it up. All the products in their makerspace went from Roborium. And because I knew what people wanted, I knew what makers, at least the basics of what the makers could use. So their soldering irons, their ultrasonic sensors, basic motors, DC motors, servo motors, everything that they needed to actually get into electronics, I supplied it, right? So I was always about collaboration, and I was never really competing with anybody on the makerspace front, because it was all a community driven thing. Without the community, you can't really survive. So I took those initiatives and I collaborated with a lot of them. And then when a lot of these makers, so now I have a pool of makers. Some of them might want to come work for me. Not everybody wants to come work for me. Some of them might want to start their own thing, or start selling their own thing, or figuring out if they can sell something online, or will a product work or not work. And crowdfunding has sort of just taken off around that time. So before crowdfunding, you want to actually see if there is a market. So I started an online store specifically for makers, where they could sell prototypes. And this was a concept that did not exist at that point. Maybe in the US it existed, but in India it didn't really exist. So MakerMandi was the combination of like eBay, Etsy, Tindy, all of these sites that sort of allow people to sell prototypes or beta versions of hardware. And a lot of artists were on MakerMandi. A lot of electronics people were on it. A lot of cosplayers were on it, selling their products. So it was this. It just sort of grew community wise, and now cosplayers sort of now started using 3D printing for their costumes. I was the first person to do that, and 3D print something and show them that you could 3D print costumes and you could 3D print potentially um, plastic masks or or put electronics into things and that kind of stuff. That was not happening in India at that point of time. Most of the cosplayers, I still remember at that point, they were using a foam that they use for making costumes, which means after a while that foam gets destroyed and has defects and all sorts of things. So you can't really store that. So with 3D printing, it's plastic and you can actually store it for as long as you want. So that was one thing that cosplayers really liked about it. So I had access to this cosplayer community also, and I was teaching them electronics. I was teaching them 3D printing. I was teaching them how to do 3D printing. What are the best 3D printers in the market? So my Roborium's 3D printer sales took off. And I was also supporting Indian 3D printer companies to sort of build their printers and have a distributorship in India. So all sorts of these things were like I said, everything was interconnected for me because I was very clear what I wanted to do. I wanted to build that ecosystem. I wanted other people to be in that ecosystem. And I wanted other people to say, I can have a career in this. And when I started, there was no startup ecosystem. There was barely, forget robotics, there was just no startup ecosystem. So it was very important to have people see that and say, yeah, I can probably do it too. So all sorts of the initiatives that we did was a combination of everything coming together essentially. So so when I got that product and into India, TotalBot 3, right? There ROS was being used majorly in research. And those robots mainly went into research, I would say. So TotalBot 3, Burger and Waffle, both of them really were selling in research institutes. So anybody in India who has that robot it went from me. I was like the sole distributor for it for a longest time. I think the next distributor came like 2 3 years after I did. So for the first 2 3 years, I was the first person to bring it to India, and I was the first person to supply it to universities, which means now people are using it, so they need support. How do you give them support if you don't have like team of people? I would have to have like team of engineers just handling that support, right? Because I'm saying dozens of institutes are buying this robot, right? At that point of time, I think I supplied to hundreds. Now hundreds of clients want support. I don't have a team big enough. Do I hire all of these people to give support? Or do I build a community where you can just access all the people who know this stuff, right? So in that ROS community, in the ROS India group on Facebook, you had people who were from US, gone and met people in US, and I knew these people and I knew their work. So you had people from US, you had people from Australia, you had people from South Korea, you had people from China. Everybody who was working on ROS was also sort of in ROS India. And that was like the first thing that we took off. And then there was a student community in India that was also working on ROS, and they were doing some experiments. I think they were in Delhi University, and they reached out and said, we have this small community of like 5 6 students who are working in Delhi University who have access to robots, who have access to, we're working on ROS a little bit. We're like, great, let's organize events around ROS and tinkering around ROS and get people to use ROS a little bit more. So we did some in-person events um, and meetups. I think ROS India meetup was handled by those students at one point. So we did a lot of initiatives around education piece, right? And in the maker space, all of this stuff that I was happening where I was teaching people in workshops at the maker space, we also did a lot of teaching outside of the maker space. So outside of the makerspace, I was going out into schools and colleges and teaching the students a lot of robotics. I went in at the university level, I was teaching students. At the school level, I was teaching the teachers because some schools in South Delhi and some schools in like East Delhi and all sorts of places in Gurgaon, I remember, they have had robotics clubs for students. So the teachers are always there. So if I go and teach a student, it's not viable for me to keep going back to that school over and over and over again. So the sustainable way of doing it is just teach the teachers, give them the best hardware possible, bring them the hardware and say this is how you use it, and now that teacher is going to teach that every student that comes out of that school for the next 10 years, right? So I don't have to worry about it at all. So that was the way that we taught in schools. And so we did workshops outside. We did workshops at MakerFest. We did workshops at any college event that I could. Right, there were a lot of college events were happening at that time as well. So a lot of that teaching sort of built my community, built the brand around Roborium, built the brand around JMoon. Everywhere I had podcasts, I had people interview me, I had articles in Entrepreneur magazine, I had articles on Hindustan Times and all sorts of places where I was being mentioned as the robot guy. Like that guy builds robots, right? So whatever the context was, like that guy's the robot guy. In Entrepreneur magazine, we had like a full feature, and it was how robotics research is taking off. And this is, I think, 2016, 2017. How robotics research is going to be big, because what happens when you have education is now people want to go deeper into it. If some of those people might want to move to industry, some of those people might want to go into research and explore further. So research was just taking off, and I think 3 years after that, sort of commercialization came into place, and people started actually starting companies that were focused on robotics and using ROS and using that as a platform to learn robotics and ROS. And then either they got access on their own or they got access at their university. And then they went on to do companies where they were doing ROS essentially. So ROS community sort of was started by me and then taken over by other people. So see that humanoid, small humanoid right there. Like that's like yeah, that's the 30 centimeter tall humanoid. It was again a way for, and if that's featured in one of the, I think it featured in Hindustan Times, like the front page or third page or whatever article was. In that article, that humanoid is up front and it has all the logos. I've removed the logos since, but it had all the logos of JMoon and all the initiatives that I was doing. So I could take that to events and I could teach people humanoids on a very basic level. I could get kids excited about it because it's 30 centimeter tall. It doesn't really hurt anybody, but it can do moves like push ups. It can do boxing moves. It can play soccer. It can dance a little bit and do Gangnam style. So that was one of the humanoids that was like great for marketing purposes. But if you wanted to, you could, and it's open source. So if you wanted to, you could potentially do research on it as well. So it's built for kids. I think anybody ages 8 and above can use it, and it's very easy to use. But at the same time, you can also code it as much as you want on C, C++ or whatever, and or Python, and actually do research on it. You can add a bunch of cameras on it because it's open source. You can add any amount of sensors on it and kind of use it that way. The other one is the robot arm right there. I think that's a 6 degree of freedom robot arm, and I use that for experimentations of my own. I always have a robot around me. It doesn't matter what quality it is. I've always had one at least around whatever I'm doing. I had one. I think for promotional purposes, we once did a video on around this tiny robot sort of lighting the Diwali diya that we had. It's probably somewhere on YouTube. So that was great for marketing purposes. It also sort of for branding purposes. And so I've always had at least one arm. Doesn't matter if it's like 3 degree of freedom or 6 degree of freedom or whatever. That one on the second shelf is the spider robot that I have, and that one is called Aragog. And it's a spider robot that I built and I wanted to experiment with. So I like robots with wheels and legs. Most of like my research was also on that kind of sector. With anything with wheels is self-driving, and anything with legs is like humanoids or 2 legs, 4 legs, 6 legs, doesn't matter. So I like those kinds of robots a lot more. And also this one right here, which is a big robot dog with 4 legs. So I like robots with legs because they can go over a lot of different terrains, and you can have a very different sort of application for those kinds of robots as well. So I enjoy those kinds of things. So that's why all of the robots in the background. And I live with way too many robots. This is just the tip of the iceberg. There's way too much electronics in my house. I have a separate room for just fitting all the electronics. If I wanted to, I could start a makerspace in my bedroom if I needed to at any point. Like I have everything that I need and more. I have every single board computer out there in the market. I have a problem with buying electronics. Let's just say that. I could start Roborium anywhere. I just have access to all the hardware that I need. I have way too much stuff. Okay, so applications wise, it really depends because every single app, these were very generic, very available in the market. You can just buy them. So majority of these were for educational purposes. These were for teaching people. These were for research purposes. These were for getting grasping concepts, right? The robots that we built for the market were things like I said, for the Vistara Airlines lounge, for example. Those kinds of things were very specific. They were operating in a particular environment, and they had to be built in a certain way, and they had to follow certain guidelines. So those were one. Applications in computer visions that we did were very specific. Applications in sensing, detecting various things in computer vision, that was also very, I can't really talk about a lot of this stuff openly, but yeah, so these were very different sort of applications that we were working on. It was the one that I was working on internally. I think the biggest, this is the project that I started in 2018. And we were like, what if we had butler robots finally? So the designs that I mentioned that I created in 2008, there's a series of robots. And in that series of robots, the first robot that needs to exist is the butler robot. So something that can be actually be used inside a house, and it can actually be used to be helpful around the house. And we started that in 2018. I used my knowledge of self-driving, my ROS skills, the team that I had at that point. Everybody sort of came together, and everybody's skills came together to build that first version of that humanoid. It was called Robot. The project was called Robot JJ, and I think there's a separate website for that as well. It's probably still active. So it was, the main hurdle of that was, how do I make it affordable enough for the Indian market? So that was something that had to be, I had to wait. And we had spent about a year on the research piece of it. And I had to stop that project because I was like, there's no market for this right yet. A, it had to be cheap enough. B, it had to do not one thing, but like multiple things, and had to understand unstructured environments, which means the AI needed to be far superior to what was available at that point. And AI that as we have it now, I would still consider it 1/10 the piece of what is needed to get to a stage where we can have really smart robots. So either I could spend time and energy building that R&D and D and doing that project for like 5 7 years and then slowly having incremental stuff, or I can shut it down and restart it back up again whenever I need to, or I can teach other people how to do it, and maybe down the line they'll start working on it and I can just invest in them. So I've been investing in all of these initiatives for a long period of time. Like invested in my first humanoid company that I invested in was probably 2012. It was a company in US, a guy working out of a garage, right? And I invested in his humanoid project. There was a university research team in Switzerland that was working on humanoids. I sort of sponsored their humanoid. SRM Team Humanoid, I was also sponsoring in India. And SRM Team Humanoid had a lot of IP. They went out into competitions and they won a lot of medals and stuff. So really great returns on that. Just the impact that it had over the years, and that sort of started my investing journey. And I've been investing since then in whatever way I could, whether it was public sector, private sector. Somebody came to me with an idea, and I invested in their company, and I said, here you go, take this money or take this resources and take this skills, take this person with you and sort of build whatever that they were working on. So that was also a piece of it that I really sort of liked. And I thought at some point, I can't keep building all the robots myself. I can't building every application out there in the world myself. I have to hire people or have to train people to actually do it themselves. And I can just invest in those people and have a robot army of at some point, because now they've gone out and built all of these robots that can do a lot of different applications, and they can come to me and ask me for investment, and I'll happily do that in return for at least one sample piece of whatever robot they have. So yeah, so that sort of just started my investing journey, and also why I stopped the R&D that I was doing, because it would have taken a lot of time and energy and resources that uh, could have gone other places. And then we started focusing on, I actively started focusing on at that point on running the incubator that was in the makerspace. So I think 2018 I started focusing more on the incubator side and helping other people build their robots. 2019 I think we were still doing that a little bit more, and I started focusing on the investment side at that. I love the sector, and that should be clear to anybody. Like, I love the sector way too much. I know exactly what the problems are in the sector, in what is holding people back from getting to a point where they can start their big companies. Because I've worked with the big companies. It's a thing that, like, if I'm going to invest in something, I actually like to see what was built. I like to test out the prototype. It's a way to see, okay, is there an application for this? As a user, I'm an early adopter for a lot of technology. I know a lot of early adopters. Anybody who's in the makerspace ecosystem is an early adopter of a lot of this hardware, right? So when you're an early adopter, the way that you think is very different, but the way that a final user might actually use a product is also very different than an early adopter. Both of those are very different sort of archetypes of people. Early adopters might be engineers who want to test it out and see if they can tinker around with it and they can play around with it, they can find some application of it. But the final user needs to be something specific. They want to use it for in a way that is only they know about, or they might want to use it in a way that the engineers did not think about. It's very important to actually use these products and kind of know, or if you have a vision already, you've sort of worked with similar things, you already know how these things work. I've been lucky enough to know and work with every single sort of product out there, any kind of robot out there, that I can usually predict what a company is going to do, how they're going to get there, what are the hurdles they might have, what are some things they might have to worry about, what are the resources they'll need beyond just the money that they need from investors. So I've been pretty good at it. I think it's just, I think it's my ability to just constantly learn, and my desire to constantly be a lifelong learner. I think that plays into it. All of these certifications I've done online, all of the the masters I've done, it's all been driven by a desire to learn some new skill. I learn something theoretically, immediately put it into action, and that's how I learn. That's my learning style. So I think that's also sort of played a role in this. Being, I'm probably, people can might consider me smart enough, but it's more of just, I just experiment. That's just how my brain works. If you give me a scenario, any kind of scenario, I will probably be able to tell you how you could implement a robot or how you could automate that scenario. Right? That's just how my brain works. And then I go back and think, well, is a robot actually needed in this environment? Or can it be done some other way? Or is there something that is a better solution than what my knee jerk reaction is? Right? So the first thought is have a humanoid robot in the home. Well, do I need a humanoid robot? What other tasks will I need to have those humanoid robot do? Can those tasks be done for cheaper in with using multiple robots? So it just depends on the way that you're thinking about a problem. I think that's just how my brain works, and I think that's just it's helped me be in this field. If I had dedicated that energy in any field, I think we would have had a similar outcome, where and I very closely came to being going into before my engineering. I came close to being in. I was planning on having a career in either forensics or as an astrophysicist, because just problem solving is a thing that I love doing in both of those things. So those could have been alternate careers for me as well. And then I went into engineering and it took off and had a separate sort of a career as a cosplayer and a separate career as a dating coach along this going at the same time. So it was a very just the desire to do things is kind of how I do how I learn and how I yeah, for some reason I love the when people are watching these detective shows and crime shows and live dramas and all that stuff. I always gravitate towards the technology piece of it, and I always want to know how they're solving the problems, because crime scene is essentially a big problem that you have to solve. How was the murder happening, and how it took place, and what went into it, the DNA analysis, and all sorts of analysis. Like it was a fun alternative that could have happened, and I very strongly considered it. But you needed to have better scores in biology to get into it, and I did not have those because my scores in yeah, my scores in physics and electronics and all sorts of chemistry was much higher, and then biology was like in the middle there. It was still science, but I didn't really like. I enjoyed botany. I enjoyed zoology. I didn't really like botany. And then so my scores were okay-ish, and then the rest of the anything that was not important, not anything that was not maths or science was like E's and 60s in those scores. So I couldn't have that career. Any career that could have been in biology related stuff, it didn't happen. I could have also had an alternate. Like when I was planning on doing my masters, my first masters, I had the option to go between MS Computer Science, an MBA at that point of time, or go into MTech Bioinformatics. And bioinformatics was like the third option that I would have chosen for myself, because I was like, that would require too much biology and that would take me into biology too much. I didn't want to do that. I still love reading biology. Like to this day, I still read books on biology and psychology and all sorts of things. But I was like, I don't want to have a career. I think I like robotics way too much to give that up. So I went into computer science MS. Yeah, online you can do any certification for anything. It doesn't depend on your scores at all. So I can just go online on Coursera or Udacity and do any course of any sort of certification I want. So I have certifications in psychology, I have certifications in biology, all sorts of things that I wanted to do as an alternate career. They became things that I did in my sort of online certifications. That sort of just feeding my own sort of curiosity essentially. So I think 2014 to 2017, there was this big trend in the Silicon Valley where a lot of people were working on social robots, and a lot of people were working on delivery robots and all sorts of things at that point of time. But there was one sort of piece missing in a lot of these robots, was the AI piece. We had AI, we've always had AI in robotics for like 20 years, 15, 20 years since I've been in it. We have computer vision, we've had NLP at certain level, we've had machine learning quite well for like the last 10, 5, 15 to years, I would say. Commercially, when you want to have a drone that is, let's say, out in the market, and it's not outside of a lab, right? It's in an unstructured environment. There's people around. There are unknown variables. There are birds around in an environment. You can't control all of those variables. So to control, you can't control them. So to adapt to them, you need AI, and the AI capabilities didn't exist, which is why I stopped R&D. I was like, I had to stop the R&D because the AI piece doesn't exist yet. If I want to launch that piece again, it would take a considerable amount of AI to have a robot that can be deployed in everybody's house and can do a bunch of chores, and because every house is different, so it has to learn to adapt to its environment, right? So those kinds of things can exist but require a lot of AI piece. Some of the robots that we do have, I would consider more of an automation where they're doing repetitive tasks, right? Where they have flexibility. You have robot arms, you have things. A lot of these companies that are coming out in India right now are supplying other things that other companies are doing. For example, last mile delivery is taking off in India, right? Hyper local delivery is taking off in India. So a lot of these hyper local delivery places have warehouses, and where they pack orders, they have no people there. There's a bunch of stuff that's being automated there where there's no human interaction, because during COVID time everybody was exposed and to wanted to have it safe and wanted to have an environment that no human was touching and there would be no germs, contamination of any kind. So these things sort of took off during COVID. Because of COVID, medical sector sort of took off in India during COVID. There's way too many problems in the medical sector in India that can be solved. And I've written blogs on, what are some of the problems in the medical sector in India that can be, where robots can actually be used, whether it's surgery, whether it's something else. Applications are coming, but India has a very different sort of applications that they need to think about compared to the rest of the world. So compared to rest of the world, India doesn't have a problem with not, and most of the Indian population is working population. So you don't have the problem of, not enough people to work. So in US, Canada, Japan, China, they all have aging population. Most of the population is either retiring or very close to retirement. So their problems are very different than what India has to work with. In India, robots can be around things that might be doing things that are hazardous to humans. So, example, robots that clean sewages, and the way that it's done in India, there's still people involved in that sewage cleaning, right? So that's a hazardous environment. Places where robots could add value to a point where it's way beyond what a human could do, like in surgery or in automating that kind of thing. In India, labor is also cheap, so it's not very capital efficient for businesses to sometime replace a human with a robot when a human is cheaper. Just to hire a human is just cheaper for them, right? So sometimes you have to think about those sort of business decisions and the market and where it exists. So you kind of need to know, as a founder, you have to know all of these different perspectives. So if you're building a humanoid robot, it might work in the US, it might work in Canada, but it'll not work in India because the labor is much cheaper. I could just get it. I can hire like 50 people for that same cost, right? Even if they're 50% efficient and the humanoid is 80% efficient, I can hire like 800 people compared to 20 humanoids and get a lot more done, right? So it just depends on the market. And so those business decisions also sort of come into play when you're thinking about this stuff. You can't just think about the tech and building cool stuff. You have to think about business, you have to think about the market, you have to think about where it will be used and how it will be used, and how people would perceive it. That's why I did psychology stuff as well. What is making people want a robot in their house in the first place? I have a robot dog because I want a robot dog because I'm in the sector. I take it out into onto the streets of Toronto, and then suddenly people are having conversations about it. But people always ask me, "What do you use it for?" Right? So in their mind, they want to not treat it as a dog. It's a dog, but they have a very different expectation from a real dog as compared to a robot dog, right? So that expectations need to be met. If you're not meeting those expectations and you're building a robot dog, but you're not meeting those expectations, you won't be able to commercialize it. I've had people think about it when they come up to me, have a conversation, and I get them talking, and I tell them the features of it. I don't tell them the application. I tell them the feature, and their brain starts working and says, I could probably use it for this, or I could probably use it for this. I could probably have my kids learn robotics through this. And they're not allergic to it. You can leave it in the house when you're traveling. There's no medical bills involved. There's no food related bills involved. There's no cleanup required. A lot of those decisions come to mind. It costs about the same as a normal dog would, like if you count the medical and food bills. So the way that people perceive humanoids and machines and robots is very different than how they would think about other appliances in their house. So psychology plays a big part of in that discussion as well. So that's how I sort of actually got into psychology earlier. But yeah, you have to think about these things as well. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So in a dog environment, like it's if when you're talking about the dog, people are like, well, what can it do? It can do all the moves that a dog can do, right? It can walk, it can navigate an environment, it has a security feature. So it has a camera, it doesn't really bark, but I can see what is happening on the camera. So it has a security feature. But additionally, on top of that, people want more from it. People want something that a normal dog cannot do, that they want expect out of this. So I tell them that it can lift about 12 kilograms on its back, and you can use it to pull a cart. Or I've had this lady come up to me one time and say, I'm losing my eyesight. Can it help me navigate the environment and be a guide dog? I said, absolutely. Right. So it has the autonomous feature and you can have it navigate the environment. So those kinds of things people want and expect more out of a machine than they do when they're replacing something. So especially in the commercial sector, you have to think about these things because you have a lot of different people. Everybody thinks in a different way. It might not appeal to everybody. So what are the people that will appeal to, kind of thing. So that needs to be a thought process that founders have to think about. So in India, I would say drone deliveries great, but can those deliveries be done on the ground? Why are they being done by drones? There has to be a solid reasoning behind using drones compared to a robot that's on wheels. Right? Why drones specifically? Why exactly drones? Where are you trying to access the delivery points? Where are your delivery points? Where are you dropping the points? So, are you dropping on people's rooftops? What if you live in a building, in an apartment building? Where are you dropping it off? Right? So those considerations have to be taken into mind when you're building something for India specifically. Anywhere, but India specifically has those sort of challenges. What if it gets stuck in the electrical pole and wiring of the poles? What if it loses battery midway? What if it's too far? How are you making sure? Then you need to have a fleet of robots, and then you need to have to make sure that they're constantly being charged, and you have a massive fleet capable of doing the deliveries without any backlog, right? Without any stoppage time. If an order comes in, there should always be a drone available to take that delivery, right? Immediately, as soon as the delivery is packed and as soon as the box is packed. So those considerations have to be kept in mind when you're doing that kind of an analysis on the business side and the application side. So I would say Indian market is growing. Like I said, you have to have very specific use cases that will appeal to the Indian market if you're planning on staying within India and you're planning on building something for India. So a lot of the times, the trend that I noticed was a lot of this funding in India follows what's happening in the US. So whatever is happening in the US, people in India usually follow and see that there's a market in the US and they start building for that. So a lot of investors do that. I'm not saying all of them, but a lot of them do, especially those that don't have experience in the sector. Because if you don't have experience, you'll follow somebody who does. So in the US market, for example, 2017, 2018, early 2018, a lot of people stopped investing in robotics. And within a year, Indian investors had stopped investing in robotics also. And then when US picks up, India picks up a little bit in the same sort of, especially in the robotic sector, not in anything else, but in the hardware sort of space. So even in the US, sometimes there's a hype cycle. There's massive periods of time where people are investing in robotics, even if they don't know what's happening. They're investing in things that are cool, may or may not have a background in hardware or robotics, and they may or may not even know what they're investing in. They're just investing in the founder and praying to God that it works. So some of those things are a challenge in the robotics ecosystem, which is why as an investor, because I've had this whole history, I've actually invested in scams also. I've invested and lost a lot of money in robotics where either the founder just took off with the money or was never to be heard again, or what they were building or promising could not be built. They didn't have the resources, they didn't have the long term thinking, they had no idea how to build it. So, as an investor, the way that I look at it now is I've translated the last, let's say, 11, 12 years of investing, and I've created a framework around it. And I follow those steps around. I put it into a mathematical term for myself. And these are the steps that I follow when I invest. These are the things, this is the right process to make sure that you have a positive return from investment. So I've been able to do that because of my experience, both as an investor and operator, somebody who understands the technology. But that combination is very rare. I don't think only a handful of maybe investors in India have that sort of a background. They might know some pieces of it, they might, but I don't think there are, yeah, I would say globally, there's maybe less than 100 people who know all the pieces of it. So the tech, the business, and the investing side sort of coming together. So India has room to grow. Make in India is taking off, and factories are being set up, and all sorts of things are happening in India that are exciting. Which means there is scope, which means there is opportunity. But you have to be very thoughtful about the opportunity. Like the valuations are can't be crazy, and then you raise $1 billion, and then your company's worth nothing when you're selling it, or suddenly the founder is taking all the money, and there's way too many scams out there. Even $1 billion companies have scams. It has to be done right, because what I've noticed is, like the same thing where people have expectations with robotics, and different expectations. It's the same thing with the businesses. If the businesses fail, the investors blame the sector. They don't blame the business. They don't really blame the founder, but they blame the sector. And that just creates a negative perception overall. Like now, if investors start saying that I'm not investing in robotics, it's a money drain, or I've lost money in robotics, and then founders will hear this and say, oh, but he's investing in robotics, so I should not start a robotics company, right? Or it'll be very tough to raise funding if I do start a robotics company. So most of the companies are surviving on passion, but it's they have to think about the business and this, the tech side of it, because there is high expectation, and whether it's on the product side or whether it's on the business side, most investors have a very different sort of perception when it comes to hardware. Yeah, look at it from a point of view, when do I want a return from this? Or what kind of a return do I want from this? For example, in investing in the SRM team humanoid, I wanted a positive return in terms of the impact it would have on the community and the ecosystem. I didn't expect a financial return, right? I didn't care about the financial return. With the company, same humanoid company invested in US, I expected a financial return. So it's a very way different way of thinking about it. From a financial return perspective, most of the investments I've done in the last, I would say, 5, 6 years, have been focused on, will I see a financial return from this in 5 years, 6 years? I don't usually keep a 20-year timeline. People investing in um, deep tech, most of the investors usually keep like a long timeline and say, okay, this is a research, might come out of research, there's considerable IP, it'll take a while to be commercialized, but it can take longer. For me, I look at it in less than 10 years, maybe like 6, 7 years. Will I see a return? What kind of return will I see in 6, 7 years? So that's how I think about it. And now, in the last few years. Before that, when I was like starting the community and focus on the community aspect of it, I was investing in things that were either very radical, that I would probably not see a return in 20 years, or maybe not see a return at all, but was good for the ecosystem. So it was very dependent on what I wanted to do in those investments. But now, in like I said, recently I've more focused on creating that framework, making sure that I see any return from any investments that I do. How long will that take? What are the resources that will be required? I can supply them the resources. I can tell them, here is the person that can help you with manufacturing, but they need to know that they need manufacturing help, right? So how self-aware are they? How do they know what their problems are going to be? Do they know if they can actually launch the product or not? Because a lot of people start the product, have crowdfunding, but it never reaches the crowd people who've crowdfunded. And I've done some of those projects as well. Well, invested in them, right? Never saw the product ever because the costs were things that they did not think about. The founders didn't think about the cost, or they didn't think about distribution. So some of these decisions have to be kept in mind. Lucky for me that I've dealt with all those challenges myself, that I know that they are going to come up, and I can help the founders out. I can have conversations with founders and say, these are the challenges that you're going to come across. Make sure that you're tackling them. And I can monitor if they're actually working on them, or are they listening to me or not listening to me, or creating the mistakes that they should not be making, right? So those sort of things are considerations that I make as an investor. So it's a very different way of thinking about it, and avoiding the hype, or avoiding the uh, things are not really in trend, but will give you a return in like 5 7 years. Yeah. So that's, I think that's the thing that happens everywhere. I think something comes up, a new technology breakthrough happens, and so suddenly people want to invest in it. I tell people who are in hardware or want to invest in hardware, or whether it's robotics, IoT, 3D printing, XR devices, wearable devices, any of those things, anything related to physical AI. If you don't have a background in hardware, if you don't have a background of AI, either find somebody who does, or don't invest in it at all. Because if you do your own analysis, which is lacking, only because it's a product that is cool, that you think will go somewhere, if you lose money, you're going to blame the sector ultimately, because you're going to make one investment in hardware, maybe, or two investments in hardware. Come to me, I'll tell you how. I don't have a problem teaching investors how to do an investment. I don't have a problem giving my feedback on whatever investment they're trying to make. They can come to me and I can help them build a portfolio of startups which are in that sector, in physical AI. But so individually, I would say don't do it if you don't have a background in it. If you want to invest in the sector, go to somebody who does know it, come to me at any point of time, and I will tell you exactly how to do it. I'm actually building a portfolio of companies myself. Like some of them are also interconnected, like my own companies were. One person can be another person's customer and all sorts of things. So, yeah, I can help you do that if you want to get into it. But if you don't have a background, you just have a passion for it, great, right? But if you don't have a background in it, don't invest, especially if you don't have an investing background in it. You might be an engineer who has experience, but you might not know what to look for on the investment side, how investments work. So it's a very different sort of a ball game altogether. So engineers with companies who've exited, Apple engineers, Google engineers, they want to invest in this kind of stuff. People who have been in infrastructure for a long period of time, they've built manufacturing facilities, they've been in telecom. A lot of those people also want to invest in this sector, but they might not have the resources or the capability to sort of do it by themselves. So I was like, absolutely, come to me anytime and I'll take care of it. Yeah. Life has been about this sector. I've done everything there is to do in this sector. My passion for the sector is easily noticeable, and you can tell that I really enjoy this. Just look at my resume, the one that you pointed out early on in the conversation. Like, look at that resume. All of that just points to somebody who knows what they're talking about, right? And who can see the view, a world view of this particular sector. And I'm not claiming to know anything about any other sector. I can't tell you if there's going to be returns in other things. My whole portfolio is hardware and robotics and IoT and XR devices and computing and holograms and all sorts of things. So I know what I'm talking about when I talk about this stuff, right? So that, I think that sort of differentiates me from other people at this point. So I would say, like I did, make sure you spend a lot of time on actually a problem that you're trying to solve, not just building cool things for the sake of building cool things. Actually have a problem that you find in the world and then see if a robot or something else is the right solution to build it, right? So a robot might not be always the right solution. So you might be able to have just a group of sensors and actuators distributed, not in a single piece of body, which is what a robot is. But if you have them distributed, you might be able to work better. So actually know what you're talking about. Spend 6 months of your life just figuring out what the right solution to that problem is. Don't do anything else. Do your market research. 6 months on the product while you're building the product, sort of tweaking it, constantly upgrade it, but listen to what your user base is saying and solving the problem. I think that's the most important thing, because most people try to build cool things that don't have a market. So that's going to lead to failure, and that's going to lead to a bad ecosystem, and that's going to lead to investors losing money. So to keep the ecosystem sane, and the valuations in check, and have a healthy valuation and all sorts of things, like not exaggerated valuations, you want to make sure that you're actually solving a problem. Don't sleep. Joking. From 2015 to 2017, when I was running four of these brands, I was running Roborium, I was running MakerSpace, I was running JMoon Labs, and I was running MakerMandi. At that point of time, I was working 20-hour days. I was working 20 hours. I would sleep for 4 hours. As soon as I would wake up, I would be back at work. Not sustainable in the long term, but for 3 years, that's what my schedule was. I can still do that. I can still work 16 hours. I can still work 18 hours, 20 hours if I need to. I think my passion keeps me going, because my brain works in a way that if I'm concentrating on something, I do not feel the need to drink water. I've gone days without drinking water. I've like 3 days. I had food, but I forgot that I had not had water for like 3 days for some reason. I don't. And 3 days later, I was like, oh, I think I forgot to drink water in the last 3 days. So I think my body is just built to be an entrepreneur. It's just built to survive in that way. But I think that sort of keeps me going. It's just the passion for the field is allows me to do all the things I want to do. The cosplay, so I do this, so most of the time I spend is work, whatever I'm working on at that moment, whatever is taking up my time and resources, and my mental energy and my physical energy is the main focus. If I have free time, I do my DIY projects, I do anything that is not related to career stuff, but something I want to work on, right? Learning a new skill, doing something fun for myself. Cosplay is part of that. Doing a DIY project, kind of a thing. Like during COVID, I had way too much time. The makerspace was shut down. So I spent majority of that time finishing my Iron Man suit, for example, right? Because I'd been trying to build that suit for 2 years. I didn't have time to do it because I was always working. And so during COVID, I had time and nobody was disturbing me because Makerspace was shut down. Like, great. Now I have access to all the tools. I have the 3D printers. I'm not printing robot parts or something. I have all of these printers are free. So ended up finishing my Iron Man suit at that point of time. And that's what I do. And then when I have free time from that, that's when I do like my traveling and going to things that are art related and creative in certain aspects. And when I get free time from that, that's when I insert myself into other people's relationships and solve their relationship problems as a dating coach. And then if yeah, so that's sort of how the progression works. That's my priority in life. I think that's what keeps me going. The optimism, I think it comes from I am very like annoyingly optimistic to the point where I don't think I can ever be pessimistic. I see a problem, and most people see a problem and they get discouraged by it. I see a problem and I see a challenge, and I it gets me excited. And if it's chaotic, I love managing it. If it's breaking me out of the monotony of the usual day, I love it. And that I think sort of optimism is required to continuously keep doing things that you enjoy, even if there are problems and hurdles in the way, right? That's what I think made me like a great entrepreneur in that sense. Because if I did not have that optimism, the first sign of trouble, I probably would have given up, right? If I didn't have that annoying vision of what I want to see in the next 20 years of my life, if I did not have that, it would have never happened. So I think that sort of also helped be an entrepreneur for me specifically. So yeah, very annoyingly optimistic. I enjoy what I do. Mm. Yeah, so it's you have to have that passion to say after your masters, you have a job offer in hand, and from a well-known IT company, and they've given you a job offer, and you say to them, "I'm not coming," and they keep asking you, "Why are you not joining us?" And like, I don't want to. It's a very hard decision to do, right? So for me, that was an easy decision, and I had that conversation, and they were like, "Why are you not joining?" I was like, "I don't. I'm good. I'm good. I'm going to start something of my own." So those kinds of things, it requires a little bit of a resolve. It requires a long-term vision and optimism. Like, hey, I can do this. This is something I can actually achieve. I can believe in myself enough that I know I can do this. So if you don't have that, it's a very tough journey for you. I wouldn't say my journey was not tough, but I enjoyed it. I enjoyed every tough piece of it. I think that's what separated me from a lot of founders at that time. Yeah. Yeah, that is certainly a piece of it. Without it, it's very tough to be an entrepreneur. Not everybody's built for that, for an entrepreneur lifestyle, for sure. If you can't have that, it's very tough to survive the. You'll have some good times, but the bad times are going to really, really test you out. So if you don't survive those bad times, you have to have that sort of optimism if you want to survive that. So AI has improved in the last few years to a point where now social robots can also be a thing, and it'll drastically improve social robots because the way that we understand the robot understands you is going to be much better than it was, let's say, 5 7 years ago. It's going to be incredibly. You're going to start seeing robots in public spaces essentially, especially in the US and Canada. I think there's a big market for that. Here in Canada, so when I talk about potential, I have to talk about the markets that exist around the world. So in Canada, for example, agriculture, retail, blue collar jobs, some of these will see automation and robotics and physical AI sort of come into place. In India, it will have to be because people want better standard of living now in India. People want have a desire to actually. I think COVID exposed a lot of people's like fears around having a certain level of healthcare and stuff that people now want a certain level, and so our automation will hopefully take away the dangerous jobs that exist in India that are still being manually done. In the US, they also have an aging population problem. Agriculture could take over. In the US, hospitality, entertainment could also be potentials for like robots to exist. Digital twins in medical, digital twins in all sorts of actually industries will be big. Manufacturing will get much better. That a lot of these countries are trying to bring manufacturing back to their country, right? Like everybody's been outsourcing to China for a long time, and they're trying to bring it back. But to bring it back, they don't really have the skilled labor anymore. So they would have to either train those skilled labor or automate it, right? So manufacturing will be very transformative in how things are done. And then in India, like I said, grocery deliveries and on the back end of all of that, grocery deliveries and the hyper local deliveries, all of that is being automated to a certain point, and that's where physical AI and robots sort of come into play. And self-driving is going to massively improve. Self-driving in terms of highway transportation, so maybe not last mile delivery in India, but last mile delivery in US and Canada is big. Last mile delivery in India can probably still be done cheaper by humans. So it depends on the cost and depends on how much. If you can build something that's drastically better, absolutely, it'll definitely replace that. But yeah, so there's multiple sectors across multiple countries. Everybody has a different. We'll start to see a different impact, but one thing is common, that hardware and AI is coming together. The physical AI, the age of physical AI is starting. It, like I said, has been around for a while, but physical AI and the embodiment of AI and combination of AI and sensors and real time data is going to start coming up now. essentially. AGI may be a little bit further ahead after that, because for AGI you need real time feedback from sensors, and you need real time an exploration of an environment for AGI to exist. So you can't have that without the physical AI step. So if you want to have an AGI that is learning by itself, is able to solve different sort of problems, it's able to navigate different sorts of environments, the hardware piece of it and physical AI is very crucial to that development. So physical AI will come first, then AGI, and then hopefully not the end of the world after the AGI. Hopefully no Terminators at that point. But yeah, that's the AGI that's coming. I would say in the next 10 years. Yeah, I'm investing in all of them. As an investor, I'm investing in all of them. Literally, all of them. I'm focused on US and Canada right now, but I'm keeping an eye on what's happening in India, because India is setting up their manufacturing a little bit more because of Make in India. So I'm keeping an eye out on what's happening. But I'm already in touch with all of my network in India. But I'm focusing more on US and Canada right now, because right now I think the first step will happen here. I think the first step of where physical AI sort of takes off in the market, I think that will happen here. So that's why I'm focusing here. And I'm focusing on all sectors. I'm focused on the technology piece. I don't care what sector it's being used in. So I'm using, for example, agriculture, elder care, retail. You have metaverse, wearable devices, computing devices that you can, AR glasses, for example. Innovation that's coming up in 3D printing and how manufacturing is done. For example, how can AI, let's say you have a drawing of a part that you want to manufacture. How can AI translate that into a 3D structure and ship it off to manufacturing and improve your manufacturing process? All of those things are interconnected for me. So that's also one piece I'm looking at. Entertainment. How can robots be used in hotels? How can robots help people out as a butler, as helping them carry stuff, helping them in unstructured environments? I'm looking at all of it. So yeah, anything. No, currently I'm not really coding that much. If I had to, I know exactly what I would start. But right now I'm not working on anything specifically. I'm more focused on investing in other founders who are doing really amazing stuff. I'm making sure that I can help them in the best possible way and advise them in the best possible way. I'm opening up my resources that the network that I've created over the last 10 plus years as a founder. I'm putting them in touch with the right resources across the world. Those are the kind of things I think I enjoy now more. And I spent all of last year just consulting with founders from all sorts of different sectors, in food and fashion, in hot sauces, in CPG, in all sorts of things. And I really like that piece of working with the founders now. And so I think that's what I'm focused on majority of the time. I still do, like, I'll take that arm down sometimes and just code some random algorithms and experiment with it sometimes, or I'll take my dog out for a walk, or I'll work on that turtlebot 3, or I'll work on the spider a little bit. There's also another project that yeah, exactly. So I have another project that I have. It's a robot that was built in like the 1980s, right? And I somehow got a hold of this old robot from sitting in somebody's junk, and I got it. And I have all the sensors and cameras and SBCs, massive amounts of electronics. So I'm planning on bringing that robot into like the 21st century and having it be a little bit more smarter and stuff. So that's like a personal pet project DIY thing that I'm working on, because this robot is way too old, so it has like a tape recorder in front of it. It had that sort of mechanism. We've made a lot of improvements since then in the hardware space, so I want that's one of the one things. I don't get enough time to work on it these days because of all the investments and all the other stuff that I'm working on. But yeah, I'm happy to have somebody take it off my hands and build it for me and come back to me, or have like hire an intern or something to actually work on it. Just don't have the capacity to do it right now. But yeah, those are the kind of things that I'm working on right now. Right. Right. Absolutely. Anytime. If somebody here in Canada wants to work on this, I'm happy to send it to them. They can work on it and send it back to me. I'll give them all the hardware. Same thing. Experiment, go crazy, do whatever. You have the whole access to my whole all of my electronics warehouse that I have, and I'm happy to give it to them, and they can come back to me and say, "Oh, this is the final vision that we've created." So I have a vision for it, but I'm open to people experimenting with it as well. Not a problem. Yeah, I could potentially like on the AI piece of it. I could definitely have people in India sort of working on it. Canada and India are, I think, doing really great work on AI and the applications of AI that are coming up. So yeah, definitely, I could have people in India work on that too, for sure. I don't, like I said, anytime. No, like I said, I can stay up for 20 hours. All of those 20 hours, I'm happy talking about robotics all day, every day. So that is a conversation I'm happy to have anytime, any place, and for however long it takes. Most of the conversations I have with founders are like scheduled for 30 minutes, but end up being an hour and a half. So it's just when you get two founders who are interested in robotics together, sort of they start talking. I'm all obviously more of an investor in them, but I still love talking about and hearing their vision, what they're talking about. So we go full nerd on our conversations. So those are the conversations I have with founders. So always, anytime, if you want to talk about robotics, anybody, I'm open to it. But don't worry about the funding. The funding will come. Start building stuff, start learning the skills, make sure that you are actually passionate about it, solve a problem, and the funding will follow. Don't worry about it too much. If you need sources, I can put you in touch with the right funding sources. Depends on what they're building. But yeah, happy to do that, and happy to have a conversation, have a conversation around how to build a business out of a product. Happy to have a conversation with anybody who wants to get into robotics as just at an engineering level, whatever that conversation. I'm happy to have it all. Yeah, and so I think there's a lot of potential in India that's not being used in electronics and robotics right now. But I think there's a second wave coming in India that a lot of founders are going to start cropping up again, and they're going to use the new infrastructure that is being built in India to sort of start and launch their companies at a much bigger scale. And I love that. Thank you for having me.